What's up? I'm a little tired today.
You're not busy or anything. I can't imagine why you would be tired with 2 young children. Nothing tiring at all about that.
No. Yeah, just got home yesterday from Minneapolis and went and recorded all these tutorials in my office at home, but I don't actually do live things in front of people except for a conference talk maybe. And I've done, I think, one at the Chicago Ruby Conf workshop there, but I was just up in Minneapolis doing a front end masters, which will be rebranded soon. And yeah, did a Rails workshop for them. They're obviously called front end masters, but that was more of a legacy name because they're getting into AI and Kubernetes and backend frameworks and Python and Ruby and all kinds of stuff.
All of the other things that aren't on the front end.
Yeah, that supports the front end. But yeah, it was fun. We talked like a year ago or more, I think, about doing it, and then kind of conversation fell off, and then they followed back up, and I was like, let me make a more concerted effort to put something together. So it was kind of a challenge because, it's like 9:30 to 4:30, basically straight. I mean, we had a few breaks, obviously for lunch and stuff, but it was cool. It was like live streamed on their website, so anybody could watch live that day. It's recorded. They'll edit it. It'll come out in a week or so, something like that. That they take the live stream, cut it down, chop out the pauses and whatever else that we had for the bathroom breaks and whatever. There's like 5 people in their office. So there's a big office building we went to downtown Minneapolis. They've got all rigged out with their live stream networking and cameras and lights and all of that. So it was a cool experience to see. They're on a whole other level than what I'm used to. So it was neat to see all that.
You kind of got the worst of both worlds where it's live streamed, but what you're trying to do is present something like you normally would in terms of for someone watching it later.
It was a little challenging for the people in person to keep up with what I was doing because there was so much I wanted to cover, and I still had to cut out a ton. So I was like typing fairly fast, and people trying to follow along in person didn't really have the time to type what they saw on screen, run it locally, see that they made a typo here or there, figure out where it was. Because also on screen, I forget, it was like 1440p or something was streamed or whatever, but obviously you need like to have your font sizes and everything bumped up, so you can't like see a whole lot at once. Ideally, you could see my normal Apple Studio display setup where it's like when I'm building one feature, we can see all 4 or 5 files at once and you can see how they all tie together, but definitely couldn't there. So it was a lot of swapping between files and jumping back and forth and whatever, which always reminds me of, trying to work on like a 13-inch laptop or something. It's like, I just can't see enough. It's always frustrating to me because I got real used to, well, now I have 3 monitors. I've got 3 27-inch monitors, but the side ones are vertical. So then I can put terminal and Spotify and browser on one or whatever. But like the main display is just split for editing code and stuff. So that works.
Wow.
That works nicely because then I can like see everything at once, which when you get into a complicated application like say Hatchbox, you need to see a whole heck of a lot of things at once. I felt a little out of place just on that alone, just being like, I can only see like 10 lines of code at once. This is wild.
Wow. As a person who has gone through and watched a lot of your videos, the thing you mentioned about there's no time for them to catch their own mistake and try it again before you've gone on to like 2 points down. Yeah, I'm pausing your Go Rails videos constantly because like I'm trying to do it in parallel with you to kind of get the muscle memory behind what you're doing. And sometimes I'm like, okay, I think I know where Chris is going to go next. So let's just hammer out that piece and then see if I'm right.
Which is a good way to test yourself. And if you know what you're doing or you think you know, and then you're like, let me try this, and then oh, he did something different, that's interesting, and you get to like piece together your knowledge with the other approach or whatever really nicely. I
Yep.
always enjoyed that about screencasts because I did the exact same thing, trying to follow along but get a little ahead sometimes just to gauge my own expertise in whatever I was learning there. And it really quickly tells you, oh yeah, of course, I did it this way. I just didn't think about this other requirement or something, like a feature that, oh, the video took it in a slightly different direction, but I understand why, because I wasn't thinking about this piece or whatever. And so I always found that very useful. The workshop thing seems like it goes or is doing very well for front end masters. They're able to give people who live in Minneapolis or want to come to Minneapolis, because I think any of their customers are like welcome to come as long as they have space. I forget, there was probably space for 10 or 12 people in that room. And it was just a cool option to have, that you could go hang out with those people in person. One of the people there, Nehemiah, was from St. Louis, so we connected on that. And there was a couple there that were GoRails subscribers. That was a lot of fun to meet them. And then I went to, it just so happened to be that that Tuesday night was the Minneapolis Ruby meetup. Another person in GoRails that was involved with that meetup was like, DM'd me and was like, hey, it looks like you'll be in town, so if you want to come hang out, we'd love to have you. So I went to that. That was pretty fun. They have this thing called Minibar, Minnebar, which is first held in 2006. Minibar is the nation's largest and longest running technology unconference. So like people can submit their own talks about anything. It's huge, it sounded like. It is just happened, it looked like, at the beginning of May. And the meetup was them talking about organizing the Minibar conference thing, unconference. And they have written their own open source Rails application that started very long time ago and has been upgraded to like Rails 7.2 or something. And they've got the functionality of like collecting talk submissions, but also rendering out the schedule, and then the back end of like analyzing all of the talks that were submitted and collecting votes, and kind of like what Sessionize does. Actually, their open source app is called Sessionizer. So they basically showed off that project, and then were like, hey, we have all these things we would like to do or whatever. And one of them was like, implement something like standard RB so that all the contributions end up following the same coding format and everything. So it keeps things more consistent, because things have, over the years, and different people and their preferences on writing Ruby style ends up vastly different all over the place. So it was a nice option to go do that or whatever. And then, well, they're still on Auth Logic as their authentication library. And apparently that's still maintained. I don't really know of anybody much using it anymore, but there's commits as of a couple of weeks or months ago I saw, and I was like, well, that's cool. So they were wanting to move over to Devise. As far as I could tell, Auth Logic didn't have like email confirmation built in. So they had jerry-rigged their own version of it that wasn't super great. And so they were like, we might as well just move to Devise. Like, it's the most well-supported one. Instead of using like a user model, they had a participant model, but they were using helpers like current participant throughout the views and controllers. So it was like pretty easy to probably migrate that over, because you're using the same method names. So some of that was interesting. And then I was showing them, I found the blog post that I had used in the past for a couple migrations, but you override in your Devise model, you can override like the valid password method, where that's used for logging in. And I was telling them, basically, if you want this to be seamless and not force everybody to reset their passwords, which it would be pretty annoying, the way you can migrate over from Clearance or Auth Logic or anything over to Devise, and probably vice versa for if you want to go from Devise to the Rails authentication generator, you can override that method when they sign in, whatever the method name is. In this case, for Devise, it's valid password ? And you check to see, is there a value in the Devise column for the hashed password, which is ironically called an encrypted password, which is not actually encrypted. You can't decrypt it. It's hashed. But so anyways, that
naming things is hard.
Yeah, it is. So that makes it where you type in your password, it checks to see, have you already been migrated over to Devise? If so, we'll just use that. But if not, we'll go fall back to the auth logic column, and then you pull in the logic from their password hashing algorithm. So they were on some old thing. It was like SHA-512 hash that ran 20 times or something. So in a loop, it just rehashes it 20 times. And all you really have to do is you can drop the AuthLogic gem completely from your app, pull in Devise, then override that method in a module. And then if you get a password that matches the old AuthLogic hash, then you now have their password in memory. So you can then run it through Devise and update the password with Devise. So it hashes it with bcrypt or whatever it's configured for. And then you get the new version with the same password, and you can go eventually drop the old SHA-512 hashed version from AuthLogic. So it makes it a seamless transition because you're checking, hey, if they're already on Devise, let's just use the bcrypt thing and be done with it. But if they're not, then we can go follow the old logic, use the old password hash, and then upgrade it when the user logs in successfully with that. And then you're off to the races. So ideally, you run that for, say, they only do this conference once a year, I think. So you would run this maybe for a year, maybe 2 years or something, just temporarily or whatever, while the majority of people get migrated over. And then you would be able to email out all the rest of those people when you want to deprecate that completely. You can rip out the module, just don't include it in your, in their case, participant class or model, your user model, whatever it is. And then, yeah, just email everybody else that doesn't have a encrypted password value in the database and say, hey, we've migrated to a more secure authentication system. So in order to, since you haven't logged in the last 2 years, you're going to need to forgot your password next time you log in or something. And you can even do that. You could override the sessions controller or something too and say, when it looks up the user, if they don't have an encrypted password value, you could then raise an error and say, I guess you would redirect them probably to the login page with an alert saying, we've forced resetting your password or something for security reasons, and check your email to reset your password. So you could make it seamless too without even having to necessarily email those people, which is probably the better way to do that. You're probably going to end up forever keeping some legacy thing like that around because you're not going to be able to, some of these people will not necessarily ever come back because they left Minneapolis or whatever the case is. So, but I was like telling them that, and I was like, it works really seamlessly as long as you can find the internals of AuthLogic and find what is their algorithm that was either the default if you didn't customize it or whatever you set it to, then just pull that code out, replicate it from scratch. Because in this case, it was just using the digest module for SHA-512. So it wasn't anything fancy that you had a custom hashing algorithm or anything. It was like just using the built-in one. So it was a deal with salts or whatever too for that. If anybody's not familiar, if I remember correctly, I haven't looked into my password security stuff for quite some time, but the salt is basically so that if you and I use the same password, we end up with different salts. So at the end of the day, it's still not going to produce the same hash digest in the database. So that would be bad if both, or if you could see everybody that used the password of password in your database because all of those values match. That wouldn't be good. So
you don't want to accidentally compromise somebody else's account because the two of you happen to have the same password.
Exactly. Yeah. Technically, yeah, that applies if someone was to get access to like your raw database values or whatever, but hopefully that's an exceedingly rare situation. But these days with security stuff, you never know.
You never know anymore.
Production monitoring can be complicated. There are tons of tools and techniques, but you just want to know that your app is up and your users are happy. When your customers encounter a problem, you need clear, actionable intelligence, not walls of charts and reams of logs. That's why they built Honeybadger, the monitoring tool you've always wanted, a tool that's there when you need it and gets out of your way when you don't. With Honeybadger, you'll know when critical errors occur and which customers are affected. You'll be able to respond instantly when your systems go down and improve the health of your systems over time. Plus, you can fix problems before your customers can even report them. Honeybadger is the application health monitoring tool built for you, the developer who cares about a quality product and happy customers. Start monitoring today at honeybadger.io. It's free to get started and setup takes less than 5 minutes. Once again, that's www.honeybadger.io. Ruby 405 dropped Tuesday, I believe, during my workshop. Did you see that?
I did not see that.
There's a build system regression in Ruby 404 under the C locale. But the more important reason this was cut was a use after free vulnerability has been discovered in the pthread based get adder info timeout handler of Ruby. So a race condition exists in the timeout cancellation path of get adder info used by adder info, get adder info, and socket TCP. Because the get adder info is like, I think if you give it an IP, well, maybe not an IP address, a domain or something, a host name, it has to go look that up or whatever. And that's where it goes to find like the actual IP address or whatever it is that it actually needs to communicate or something like that. So a remote attacker who can delay DNS responses near the specified timeout may cause the Ruby process to dereference freed memory and crash. Interesting. So it crashes doesn't necessarily mean it was it's sort of a denial of service type of vulnerability, right, but not necessarily a remote code execution thingy. So still critical and important nonetheless. But
this is why we can't have nice things.
Ruby 3.4 and earlier are not affected, so that's interesting. So you won't see any issues with those.
Going back to the conversation, what you were just talking about with auth logic and devise, you mentioned the Rails authentication generator that we have built into Rails now. There's a pretty big gap of functionality between devise and what Rails comes packaged with, since the authentication generator just log in, log out, essentially.
And forgot your password. But no registration.
No registration.
No email confirmation. No timeoutable. No OAuth. No blah, blah, blah. No extensive list of features that devise supports that you might want.
Right. So as a person who has not ever really tried to build a real gem to add to the Ruby ecosystem before, I keep thinking this maybe should be kind of straightforward, but maybe not. So I wanted to see what you thought of it, of some kind of a gem to kind of bridge that gap of if you want to use the built-in Rails authentication and you want that extra functionality that devise gives you.
I have some bad news for you, but also maybe good news because it's not where exactly I want it to be, but I already made this.
Oh, did you?
It's called Revise Auth. Because I was like, I love devise because it includes all that stuff, but I don't like devise because in general, I will only ever want my applications to allow logging in as one user. Devise is generic, so you can actually have multiple login screens for different models. For
different types of users, yeah. I've had to work in apps that did that before.
Yeah, and like I get that, and I think there's a specific use case for that, but I would rather have like roles or something on a single user model in most of the time. if there was some of those cases where, let's say we have maybe a real estate application where there's people who work for the company who need sort of an admin level access, but you also have buyers and agents, buyers and sellers and real estate agents. Like I wouldn't want to have 3 or 4 different models for that. And devise internally gets a lot more complex because it's got to be generic like that. So it generates current buyer, current seller, current real estate agent, current admin, whatever. And you end up in the weeds pretty fast because eventually a buyer is going to want to get into real estate. Now they need a separate login to log in as a seller or whatever. And then a seller might actually need to buy their own house at some point. So you need like the complexity of that to deal with. And so I always gravitate to let's have one user model, sort of the same way that Rails sets up authentication is like you actually don't log in as the user. You log in with a session and you happen to use the user's password to authenticate. But the thing that it actually stores in current attributes is the session. And then it delegates all the user stuff to the session or through the session. So there's actually, you're never really logged in technically as the user. You're logged in as a session, which is another thing that I didn't love about Devise because it uses Warden and it puts the user ID right in your session cookie, which means that there's no way to log you out. We can't delete the session because there is none. Well, the only way to like force log you out is to delete that user, which isn't great. So the session concept that they've introduced in the Rails authentication generator, I think is like a big win. And the biggest one is the Warden kind of sucks. It's a rack middleware. So when things go wrong in your controllers, like logging in, the controller and Devise is just the happy path. But when Warden says it's not a valid password, it jumps out of the Rails controller into this failure process that's separate. So that ends up being incredibly tricky to follow the logic of the controllers and also deal with things like internationalization and whatever else, because it breaks out of Rails and goes and deals with it at a rack level a lot of times. So when the Rails authentication stuff was coming out, was like, I should go fill out the rest of these features with my own gem. So like you could run the authentication generator, or we would copy most of it into our library and just have a generator that does, well, actually, that was part of it, was I didn't want to use the generator because I wanted, ideally, unless I had to customize something, I wanted it to live in the gem so I could pull in the new patch version or minor version and have those security updates or improvements just done for me. And I didn't have to touch and have those views and whatever else in my app unless I needed to override them. And generally, you need to probably override every single view because it needs to be styled like your application. So that makes sense. But for the situation of logic in a controller that needs to be improved for whatever reason, like unless I was customizing that, I'll just leave the controller in the gem device. So I don't override a lot of stuff in there. For the sessions, I override for two-factor authentication and have that flow where it's like, well, your password's valid, but we're going to just save that in the cookie temporarily, but you're not actually logged in. We verified that you did log in as this user, but you do have to put in your one-time password and make sure that is correct before we actually log you in. That whole thing like required me to override part of the controller. So Revise was kind of like, what if I built a modern Devise that was just one user model? It was just most of the same features, but just using as much as possible of the Rails authentication generator. Because the other big thing I talked about yesterday or 2 days ago at the workshop was like somebody asked about, should I use Devise or the authentication generator? And I was like, well, one of the big benefits of the authentication generator is it flips the security thing on its head, where Devise is like every controller that you want to require authentication, you have to add that at the top of the controller or inherit from one that does. And the auth generator from Rails just secures every single controller by default. It adds itself to the application controller So every single page requires you to log in before you can access it, which is a much more secure thing to do than the other way around. And you can easily do that with Devise by putting that in your application controller and just saying before action authenticate user, which I would highly recommend doing. You then go to your other controllers and break out of that. So there's just a nicer default there, I think, with the Rails auth generator. I got Revise Auth built with all the basics of registration and I forget what else. I haven't touched it for a little while.
Are you tired of babysitting your job queues? Let us do it for you. JudoScale monitors and autoscales your job queues so you can stop babysitting and get back to coding. We support Sidekick, SolidQ, GoodJob, and just about every other job backend in Rubyland. And of course, we autoscale your web services too. JudoScale scales up your apps faster than any other autoscaler, so request timeouts and backed up job queues are mitigated before they become a problem. JudoScale has a free plan you can use forever, so there's literally no risk, whether you're on Heroku, AWS, Render, or any other cloud platform. Visit judoscale.com and get your job queues under control.
I also noticed that there was improvements periodically being added to the Rails generator. One of the ones that I'll point out is in Rails main. I don't believe it's here yet. Let me find the has secure password, secure password.rb. Oh, it's an active model. Yes. So I don't believe this is in Rails 8. It's in main right now and will be out in the next release, but there's a new algorithm option you can pass over. So you can give it a symbol for it to look up the algorithm. You can register an algorithm or you can pass in the object. And that way, for example, if you wanted to do that auth logic or clearance to migration or to bcrypt, because Devise also uses bcrypt, but they'll also set customizable stretches. So like in development or test, actually, you'll see stretches is usually set to 1. So it'll like run your password through bcrypt 1 time, whereas production might run through 12 or 20 times or something like that, just to give it some further entropy and stuff. But as far as I understand, I will say I'm not a security expert, so I could absolutely be making mistakes with my understanding there. But for speed, that is something you may have to like tweak or whatever. And Rails used to just have a hard-coded, this is the bcrypt thing for has secure password, but there was no way to change it. scrypt is another option. There's a whole bunch of other things you could do, a lot of other insecure things you could do. But in Rails main, at least, you can now provide a class that has, it just needs a handful of methods. So hash password, verify password, password salt, and validate, and an algorithm name. So you're able to then go provide those to has secure password to build your own custom thing, which will make it much easier to migrate from Devise over to the Rails auth generator from scratch or using Revise Auth. So maybe that's something we could work on, because Revise was kind of like an experiment at the time. It works pretty well, but now that there's some more improvements in Rails to allow us to add a custom password algorithm or whatever, like we could have like an example built in that's a migration from Devise, and we can just pull, whatever the default stretches is, unless someone's customized those, we could just ship that automatically. And then you could point it to, or you could rename the column, because it's like password digest for the Rails generator, but encrypted password for Devise. So you could like copy the column over and rename it or whatever if you wanted to test this locally. Obviously, like production scale of GitHub size or whatever, you would need to do 0 downtime migration kind of things for something like that. Because I was looking into doing this for Jumpstart, because Devise is fine, but like we've customized the OAuth process a lot and just a whole lot of things that start to pick away at a lot of the default Devise controllers to add one-time passwords and whatever else. I don't think Revise has that in there yet. So it's like we could add the RQR code gem and the OTP gem and methods for that and whatever else, and like really build that in an elegant way. because I've had to do some kind of feels hacky to override the controller sometimes in Devise because of Warden mostly. When things go wrong, you just don't have the control of it. Yeah. At the end of the day, like Revise Auth, we could probably build a lot of the Devise functionality in, because I was also trying to do, we have like the current user helper. So ideally, maybe we decide to drop that in like version 2.0. Like I think it's due for a major version change now that the Rails stuff is kind of set more in stone. But yeah, giving the complete registration, building in some OAuth functionality, and then letting people decide how they want their OAuth stuff to work. So like there's considerations to make that if a user registered with their email and password and then happen to go through like Google or Facebook Auth or something, and there's a user with the same email address, is that safe and secure to connect those accounts? Because the original user did not have that. And like, if Facebook allowed you to register with any random email address and you could use OAuth immediately without confirming you own that email address, that would be an attack vector that you could hijack somebody's account in your app or whatever. So there's things like that that we do in Jumpstart where like we don't allow that. We require you to go log back in as that email or that user with the other authentication mechanism, and then they have to add it afterwards or whatever. So I would love to like have good defaults for all that just could be with this gem, and then most people don't need to touch it, but they could, if they did decide they wanted to make them automatically connected, they could, I guess. But it having one-time passwords built in, the multiple gems that add a plugin for Devise, I just did not like how any of them worked or couldn't quite wrap my head around how to properly implement them. So that's another thing that I would love to just add and just have nice and clean. But it's about due for another like big refactoring, and that would make for a good Go Rails series too. So I might have to walk through that, and would love the contributions and stuff on it. I think it's just going to take a lot of people and time to get to sort of the Devise level of functionality of like, you are required to confirm your email address within a certain time period. You know, that's a feature that you may want to turn off, but you may want to turn on, and helps protect with spam users or something. Like the minibar people said they had a ton of spam, and that's the big reason though why they were looking into email confirmations. Because I was also telling them too, like the generates token for functionality in Rails 7 or whenever that came out is perfect for password resets, email confirmations, you name it. And you can put your expirations in so that that token, when you send it out via email, expires after 15 minutes or 2 hours or whatever it is. You have so many useful things there. And then, there's the rumor. I remember DHH or somebody was talking about adding like passkey support to Rails, which is starting to crop up a whole lot more. And it's effectively just an alternative to your password for authentication. That hopefully will be something that we could just, I am assuming they're just going to pull it into the auth generator if they do, which hopefully would get mostly for free with Revise. Because I think Campfire and Once products, I remember seeing like they have a page of the sessions that are actively connected. So that's something I believe I built into Revise as well. So you get to see like, I'm logged in on my desktop, on my laptop, on my phone, on my iPad, and then you can revoke those sessions, which just delete them from the database. But then the cookie in the iPad's browser is no longer valid because it points to a session ID that doesn't exist anymore. Which logs them out, which is great. So we get a lot of that functionality, and we could just build a simple controller that has basically like an index action and a destroy action. And voila, you've got that feature, and you just need to link to it or something. And maybe that's a piece that could be built into the UI for the edit profile or something, because we'll need some sort of edit registration like Devise has to delete your account, but also update your email address and your password. And those are also ones I believe I split out where like you update your email address, and that is separate from updating your password because it sends an email to your old email address that you're changing it, because you don't want to send it to the new email address.
Mm-hmm.
Is it that way? I don't remember. I always forget that. I'm tired today, so pardon for my inability to process this. But you need to like confirm that you also own that new email address.
Right.
And I guess it has to go to the new email to be confirmed, because
there's an argument that it needs to go to both. That
yeah,
the new one should be wanting to have that happen, but the old one should be confirming, yeah, I'm okay with this happening.
Yeah, the old one should be. I'm just thinking of the case of like if someone got access to like my Apple account or something, changed it to their email address. If you send it to the new email, then they're just like, as the attacker, like, perfect, it's mine now. So you can't send it to the new one. You'd have to send it to the old one, but hopefully that old email address isn't compromised
Also
or whatever.
compromised, yeah.
So, but yeah, that kind of stuff is all part of the registration and whatnot that the Rails auth generator just doesn't include.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've had the itch to get back to this, and I started it and was like, cool. And then there's a little open-endedness of how are we going to do this? And maybe there's some arguments to be made of like having an optional feature where we could turn on. I'd like to encourage everybody to use current attributes with revise auth, but there may be a good argument to say, let's have a feature to toggle the helper method of like current underscore user just for backwards compatibility for anybody upgrading from like Devise or Auth Logic or whatever. Because that could be interesting to have as well, like it would help migrating our own applications because we use that pretty consistently because we use Devise. So I was thinking of it a lot in those terms, but also I started to feel like just embracing everything from scratch might be the better way to look at it, because then you don't get held back by any backwards compatibility things, and you can actually take a fresh approach and do a little bit better you're not simply recreating Devise. You can innovate a bit. Let's secure everything by default and then allow unauthenticated access with such a clean method name and everything that very clearly states what it does in every controller that needs that. And I was like, that's great. And stuff that I wouldn't even cross my mind because I just have used Devise forever. And I just took that for granted as that's how things work. But actually, then the other big issue with all this is, of course, customization. That's where you go down the rabbit hole of, what if I don't want it to be called password and I want it to be some other name for logging in? It's like, hey, okay, but
keyword.
Yeah, it's like now we have to have a config variable and other stuff to go. Everything now has to be dynamic and whatever. And I was trying to avoid that as much as I can. So I don't know. Some of that may be warranted in some cases, like the confirm your email within 2 weeks or we lock your account. That stuff kind of makes sense, but also definitely needs to be configurable. And you probably need to be able to turn it off and yada, yada. Every time you get into every additional configuration is adding quite a bit of complexity, at least another branch in a certain amount of places. And then that complexity spreads fast. So,
yep.
But yeah, we should chat about it more because it's been in the back of my mind of really should revisit it. And with the new stuff on Rails main, like doing a major version bump for it is going to be a pain if anybody's using it, but I don't think there's too many using it at the moment. Like the Cell Repo app I wrote uses it. I mean, it just uses current user and checks if you're authenticated, and that's about it in most places. And then there's like a PR that T27 Duck and I were talking about in Discord a long, long time ago, and he made a PR for it. But the issue we saw with the Rails authentication generator, which may not be an issue, it may be a feature, but it's a little unexpected coming from Devise. And that is, if you reference current.user without previously calling authenticated ? In your view or your controller, with the Rails authentication, it's going to just give you a nil current user. Even though technically there's a cookie and you are authenticated, there's no code that's actually run to check the cookie and resume your session. That was very unexpected to us when we were coming from Devise, because Devise automatically logs you in. Because I believe current user, when you call current user, that's like what says, is there already a user record, or go resume the session, basically. And
Right.
the authentication generator only resumes the session on the authenticated question mark method or whatever. So by default, that's fine for any controllers that are authenticated. But for example, you go to the homepage and it's a public allow unauthenticated access action that skips the resume session step. So there is no current user. And on the homepage, a lot of times you'll see like an app will still render the exact homepage, but they'll change the sign up and login links to a dashboard link if you're logged in. I'm sure you've seen that across various apps because it's effectively the same. The marketing pages are rendered by the same application. So it's able to do that nicely. Or they have some, maybe they just set a cookie or something that is a simple flag for the front end marketing pages to flip that and just be dumb about it. But potentially making it explicit that you have to check if the user's authenticated is a good idea, because it would reduce database query if you didn't actually need it on the page. So like your terms of service or something, you may not need that. But I don't know. For me, it made more sense to just modify the authentication generator to, when you allow unauthenticated access, to also just attempt to renew the session, which would go and look up the session in the database. And so it's one extra query there. But usually in my UI, I'm going to display like your name or your avatar or something for showing that you're logged in. So in my case, I was like, that seems fine to go and just modify. And that was another thing where I was like, does Revise stack on top of the Rails authentication generator? Or do we like copy paste that into the gem and then make any little modifications like that that you would resume the session automatically on those pages? Reminds me of another couple things. I think when the gem initially got released, there wasn't test helpers for it or something like that. So those got added, or the generator got released, not the gem. There was something like Rails 7.1 got it and there's 7.2 got it. And it was like a few little features that were really useful, but you didn't necessarily have them. So I also thought that the Revise Auth gem could be great to sort of backport functionality to older Rails versions. So like right now we're talking about that custom algorithm for bcrypt, or to override it to use scrypt or something else. We could take that. It would hopefully wouldn't be too hard, but you could maybe take this from Rails 8.2 or Rails 9 whenever this gets released and like make it available in Rails 8.0 or 7.2 or whatever. So it could be useful for the gem to be able to kind of backport some of those features. There's not a ton of files. Like now there's a little bit more, because there is, with this, you have there's an algorithm registry for how secure password, and Rails ships bcrypt, which is the default, and then Argon 2 is the other algorithm. So there is no scrypt built in, but there's like an example in the docs of like, if you did want to use scrypt, you could add this module and that's how you would implement it. So that could be another useful thing, is like we could check what Rails version you are. And then if you're an older one, we could override the class or the modules for has secure password and maybe backport some of that stuff so that Rails 8 could use it. Or maybe the better thing is just to make Revise Auth version 2.0 require the next version of Rails and up, which is probably what I would prefer to do, especially because those older Rails versions are going to go out of date. They probably those applications already had an authentication system. And whenever we can release this new major version would be after the latest new release of Rails. And so we could just require that and people can upgrade their app to the latest Rails first if they did want to migrate from Devise over to Revise or something. But it's a lot. This is why the open source stuff takes so much freaking work. It is so many decisions, so many little things. And you'd love to backport these features, but like you don't actually know. These are probably pretty independent. That would be not hard to backport. But sometimes if, for example, this depended on a special thing that got added to Active Record or whatever, then you end up down the rabbit hole of like, now we got to monkey patch this and that and that and this and this and that. And it's not worth it at that point for sure.
And even if they're right that it's a little thing, that's still one more thing on a pile of additional other little things that everybody else is asking for.
Yeah.
Like the fact that it's a little thing doesn't negate the fact that this is an increase in risk. It's an increase in tech debt. It's an increase in maintained code that you as the maintainer are ultimately on the hook for now.
Yeah. I hate to have the breaking changes as much as possible, but then sometimes those are necessary for clearing out the technical debt. Like Devise itself, it has checks kind of all over the place for things that are like, well, if you're on Rails 5 or newer, then you can use this feature. If you're on Rails 4, whatever, or earlier, then we got to either monkey patch this thing or you can't use the feature at all. Or we skip these tests for Rails earlier than version 5 because they didn't even have the assertion or whatever, random little things like that. And they're all over Devise because Devise is incredibly backwards compatible with Rails 4 or whatever. It's crazy.
It's been the Rails authentication standard forever. I don't even know how long.
Yeah, it really has. And I love Devise, but it just makes it a little bit hard to customize for those reasons I was talking about earlier. And like those are, I think, the understood things, because it wasn't it Raphael that had talked about like if I were to do it from scratch, I would just do the like Phoenix authentication generator, that style of things. And that's pretty much what we ended up getting with the Rails generator, but it's just not complete, which is my problem with it. It's like, I'd love to use it, but if it was complete, then it's a different story. I still have to build registration, which isn't bad. That we did in the workshop in like 15 minutes. But you have to be careful with that. You have to remember that like if you do want to collect, I think Devise, requires like your password confirmation. And we ended up doing that in the workshop as well, just for the simple reason of like teaching. I was like, look, if you have the sign up form and it's an email and a password confirmation, because you want people to be extra sure they typed in the right password, which isn't really that important these days with password managers, because they're going to suggest you a password anyways, and it's going to be saved there. But in the case that you do want to provide that, somebody can get around it by just like deleting the form field off the page and then submitting just the password, which means there was no password confirmation attribute sent over to Rails. So then it'll assign the password. There is no confirmation. It's nil. So it would skip that validation to make sure the password and its confirmation exist. So even though your UI has those two fields, it can be manipulated. So if you really want to enforce that in your params, you have to say, we require a user with an email and a password confirmation, and use like params.expect to pull those out of the params hash. But then afterwards, you can chain on with defaults and say password confirmation is an empty string. And what that'll do is if password confirmation happened to be nil, like it wasn't supported or sent over in the browser and it didn't exist in the strong params after that was done, this will force password confirmation to be an empty string, which won't match the password that you passed over. And so that's good. And then you don't have to do the same thing to the password field because it actually has a length validation on it. So it's going to check the length of the password no matter what. So you will always get an error in that case if you didn't send over a password at all. So you get that. It's just the password confirmation is implemented to be completely optional. So you can do a registration without, which I think is probably a better default these days because you can kind of assume that people are going to have a password manager, or if they don't and they forgot the password they just typed in, then they can forgot your password and reset it.
Password.
So that's not like, it's not as critical of a thing as it used to be. In fact, the more critical thing is making sure the person put their email address in correctly. So having the little JavaScript thing that's like, you typed at gamil.com. Did you mean gmail.com? That kind of stuff is probably more useful than anything. And you don't necessarily need the reset password or the password confirmation at all because you have reset password. But
yeah.
So that's stuff that I would love to do in Revise. Maybe we can pair on that sometime. I do not remember the last thing I did on Revise Auth, so it would be real interesting to look at it. And then also kind of maybe not even look at it. That's funny. I say I don't know the last time I touched it, but apparently there's a commit 2 weeks ago on it. So
I'm looking at that right now. Well, there's a version bump 2 weeks ago.
That's hilarious. I think I was mostly just pulling in somebody's PR. I didn't do any of the work myself because active support configurable was a cool way to provide like a config block to any gem, like a Rails plugin. But internally in Rails, it was like, I believe, undocumented and only used in one place in Rails itself internally. So then I think Sean Doyle caught that and was like, we should just yank this and remove it because it's simple enough as it is. And gems can just implement it themselves. And we can remove some basically unused code in Rails that way. So there was a PR because using Revise Auth gave you a deprecation warning when you used it until this latest release. So it's just a handful of little controllers. I really mapped as much as I could off of Devise here. So if you look at this, it's incredibly easy to read and follow. And then there's just the authentication module in Revise Auth. It was pretty much a clone of what was in Rails, but it also added those like current underscore user methods and called authenticate user and stuff. So I believe I ended up mapping it like way closer to the way Devise did things. And if I were to do it again in our 2.0 version, or maybe we just make a whole new gem, we could, I guess, but just stick to the Rails generator 100%, but only add to it or whatever is probably what I would do.
That's more or less what I was imagining doing. But again, having never attempted anything like this before, like this could be pie in the sky fantasy.
Yeah, because I did little things like I called these methods log in and log out. And it's like in the Rails generator, it's like start new session for user. And it was like, okay, that's cool. But you know what we could do for this? And log out was like terminate session. I think that's all it's called. Not like for user because we can only be logged in as one user. But Devise like required that to like specify a scope like a user or admin user or whatever. But we can actually achieve all of this with like we were talking about the compatibility or whatever. We could just literally alias those methods. Start new session for, just add an alias to call it login, and terminate session could be log out. Boom, done. And then you could like authenticate user is just going to be authenticated or whatever. I forget. That would just returns a Boolean, but there's one that will like redirect you or it's a before action or whatever. And I guess that doesn't even need to exist anymore. So when I wrote this originally, it was way too tied to Devise's thinking. And looking at it now, I'm like, I'd rather stick to the way the Rails does it and then add some backwards compatibility in or something instead. So it'd be fun. We should do that. Give it the old refactor, the major refactor.
Yeah, I'd be down for that.
Yeah. And I don't believe that it was too complex. So I think we would be able to dive into it pretty fast. And then the biggest issue is just going to be writing a heck of a lot of tests for things.
Yep. Authentication's got to work.
And it's important, very important to keep up to date on security things. But
yeah,
that's another one of the downsides of using the Rails See, the actual password hashing, if that was an issue, that's not a big deal because that is a bcrypt gem. They can just be bumped. But the big issue is that Rails only cuts a release once, maybe twice a year, unless it's security release, which would be a reason to do that. If there was a security issue in one of the controllers or the logic in the authentication generator, then does that get backported to Rails 8, 8.1, 7.2, whatever? And it's nice to have it implemented in a gem that can be released and upgraded independently, and they don't have to cut an entire release for it. I think that probably is a bit easier when it is just what it is right now. They've got Authenticate By, which handles timing attacks when you're logging in. And then there's just no registration issues that could come up. So that's good because there is no code for that or any other OAuth or whatever else. So the attack surface for the Rails generator, because it doesn't have fifth of the features that Devise does, it's a lot smaller for that reason. So,
yep.
Anyways, anything else you want to chat about?
At some point, I think it'd be fun to talk about the new podcast thing that
I was gonna say something, and then I was like, I don't know if he'll want to talk about it yet. So
we can.
I think you should say what happened as a teaser when it comes back.
Oh, okay. So yeah, at RailsConf last year, I was approached by Elise Schaefer. Work and real life kind of circumstances had kind of conspired to start really limiting her time with managing the Ruby on Rails podcast. And she had kind of inquired if I'd be interested in co-hosting it with her so that we'd swap off doing episodes of our own so that it cuts her workload in half, basically. But then that didn't work out because real life got worse. And I don't know any details about what happened. I just know
God,
I wasn't able to.
I just pulled up the website because I was curious when the last episode was. It's today, last year.
Last
year, May 21st, 2025. Wow.
Yeah. So I guess it's weirdly appropriate to be talking about it today.
Yeah, that's amazing. I had no idea. What special timing.
Yeah, interesting. But yeah, so like that was the idea, was I was going to co-host it with her, but then things got busier for her and I wasn't able to get in touch with her for a while. And then maybe a month or so ago, I figured it's been a while. Hopefully real life has gotten better and healthier for her by now. So I reached out to her again to see if she'd be interested in getting the podcast going again. And she basically kind of came to the conclusion that she's not going to be able to dedicate the time necessary to get it running again, and transferred it over to me. So I'm working on getting the Ruby on Rails podcast up and running again. I've got my first sponsor locked in. I've got 2 guests that I'm going to be recording with tomorrow for the first couple episodes back. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to having the Ruby on Rails podcast back, even though I'm going to be the one running it now. That'll be weird.
Super awesome to see it coming back. And it's already been through multiple hosts over the years. So like it never died. And just kind of as time changes and whatever, people's lives change, this goes to the next host and you're the person being responsible for keeping it going forward. And at some point you will be busy probably and pass it off to the next host. And it's cool. I really love that.
At some point, yeah. I'm really looking forward to it. I really liked the direction that Elise was leaning in with the podcast of trying to focus on startups and smaller, younger companies building on Rails. It's like I'm going to try to pick some of that up when I can, but the avenue of things that I've always been more interested in is the community aspect of it, of what people are doing, not necessarily building with Rails, but also building communities around it. My first 2 guests, I guess I'll just spoil this right out of the gate. I'm going to be talking to Travis Doctor about the Blast Off Rails conference that he's putting together in June, so next month. And then Jeremy Smith to talk about Blue Ridge Ruby, which just happened earlier this month. Because like doing those types of big events outside of just the cost and the effort involved is kind of like what did you learn from doing these types of things? What would you do different? Like, I'm really kind of curious and interested in those types of questions for building communities around Ruby and around Rails. And so,
right. What's big news? What's your plan for cadence on it? Do one a month, one a week, one a day?
Not one a day. What I sold the initial sponsor on was the cadence of 2 a month. And then immediately after I locked that sponsor in, it was just kind of like, wait, I had this new idea where suddenly I could have as many guests as I wanted. I had an idea for trying to promote RubyConf, of like having speakers at RubyConf on the podcast to talk about, their talk idea, the conference, whatever. Kind of like what Jeremy Smith was doing in the lead up to Blue Ridge Ruby. He had,
I love those.
The speakers for the conference come on and do a little YouTube video with him. I had that idea after I locked in the first sponsor. I was like, oh, I could go weekly immediately if I started doing that, but I can't afford to do that. So maybe I need to look at getting a secondary sponsor to fund that. It'll depend on how things go with conversations to see if I can get the money for that.
That'll be fun. I like that a lot. If you can't go to the conference, you get a look at the people at the conference and you get an experience of the conference if you didn't make it. That was a bit of the personal stuff that they'll record and publish the talks, but those are like lectures almost.
Right.
And it's the conversation that you missed that I always feel like I missed out. If I watch the talks, I'm like, okay, maybe I learned something, but I didn't get to experience still the conversation just about things in general. That's way less formal that way. And that's what I love the most about the conferences. So I think it's a cool way that you can bring that sort of around the conference as well. I saw on the Twitter page for the Ruby on Rails podcast, September 27th, 23. So like 2.5 years ago, the episode posted was, hello, Elise, goodbye, Brittany. So that's when Brittany handed the reins over. So I don't know if you can get Elise on to hand the reins over for you, but who hosted it before Brittany? I forget. And there's a lot of posts during Brittany's time here. So scrolling back through everything's going to be hard to find.
Yeah. She's been the host for a while. And
Yeah.
by the time I was listening or had found the podcast, she was already the host. So I have no memory at all of who it was before.
537 episodes. So there's a whole huge amount. And Nick Schwatter is a host as well. I don't remember if he was always in there, kind of was around to help host as much.
He would bounce in from time to time.
Yeah.
I need to reach out to him and see if he has any interest or desire in being involved with the podcast still or not.
Yeah. Wow. First episode, January 6th, 2009. Jeez. That was a long time ago.
Been a little while.
Ooh, there's an episode on Heroku, February 8th, 2009. What if your server resources were metered like your electric bill? Heroku has set out to build a metered cloud computing deployment solution for Rails. Stick around for the last 10 minutes where we talk about the economics of startups. Wow. There was a time back then, 17 years ago? Oh my God.
The days of yore.
Yeah, billing by the hour for hosting was like innovative. Now everybody does that. That's crazy.
Yep.
Block.io, learn to program with Ruby on Rails. That's crazy too. Boot camps and everything.
Oh man.
A long time ago.
A whole era of the industry that has disappeared now.
Ooh, there was an interview with Ryan Bates back in February of 2009. I might have to listen to a few of these just to get some nostalgia here. I was looking at Remote Ruby. We're at, somewhere we apparently got off count by one because our Buzzsprout page says we have 350 episodes and our latest episode was 351. So we misnumbered at some point. I'm not going to go back through and reconcile that.
It's inflation. It's what happens.
Yeah, that's going to be a mystery. So, yeah, who knows?
I want to know where the number discrepancy is, though.
It's probably you'll have to go all the way back and it'll be like, we started on episode number 2 or something ridiculous. Episode 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'll just count it. 350.
Found it.
Where was it?
We have an episode. No.
Or maybe a duplicate episode number or something. Well, no, we'd have to skip one. See, I don't remember if we even had episode numbers on our old podcast host and stuff. So it may be when we migrated or something, could have been something around importing those records or whatever.
Yeah, it looks like the episode numbers only go back to 321. And then before that, you don't have episode. Oh, I guess there's a couple that just don't have episode numbers in the middle. That's interesting.
Yeah, this is funny. Episode 106, 107, 109, 108, 110. So 109 and 108 got released in the opposite order. But it was live recording Hotwire release day. So I think that's probably the reason we had one already recorded. We decided to publish it afterwards.
Right.
Because that's a big day.
Kind of similar to what we did recently with the whole Ruby Central conversation was we had that one other episode recorded.
Oh, yeah.
And then the Ruby Central news came out. I was like, well, this is more timely and more pressing to talk about. And so.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really be. Aside from just, I like to see the number of episodes we've done. The number does not actually probably matter at all.
Okay.
And your podcast players are pretty good about remembering the ID of it. You're not probably basing this on and keeping track internally of with your own brain. Good times. It's crazy how many 500 some episodes is still a long ways off for us. Another 200 episodes, if we do one a week, is 4 more years.
Yeah. I think I finally found it.
Which is it?
We've got an episode 260 and an episode 258, but it doesn't look like we have a 259.
Huh. Because we would have probably still had, I believe we would have had Paul editing then. Yeah, and like 248, then the next few episodes don't have episode numbers. Then it picks up at 255.
Yeah. Anyways.
Because they're just optional when we type them into Buzzsprout.
Completely unimportant rabbit hole of it is like trying to figure out where the off by one is. This is
keeping them on the edge of their seats. The lost episode 259, if we find what it was and it wasn't something we just misnumbered, we could drop that as a secret episode. You have to subscribe to our Patreon.
Or it could just become the joke of
for
like
$5,000 a month, and then we'll let you hear it.
Or it just becomes the joke that we reference. This happened back in episode 259.
You'll have to go listen to episode 259 to find out our secrets. All right. I got some work to do. I am also ready to go back to bed because these kids don't sleep. So it'll be a battle to decide which of the two options there is more enticing.
Yeah. I promise they do start sleeping through the night eventually.
Yeah. In like 4 or 5 years.
Varies by child. I give you no promises when it will happen.
Varies a lot by child. Oh my goodness. Well, I will catch you, and hopefully Andrew will be less swamped. We didn't even mention that. He messaged us and was like, I'm too important and too busy for you guys, so I won't make it today. And so
that's exactly how he phrased it too.
Yeah, that is exactly what he said. Yep. So screw you, Andrew. We'll see you next week. We miss you. Later.
Bye, Chris.